So when we're looking at the, this is the patient education part. We're going to go on a couple major components of the patient education. So remember, you want your whiteboard. What's the reason we want the whiteboard? Visualization. 55% of how we communicate is visualization. That's the number one reason. So we want a big whiteboard. This whiteboard's actually too small. The biggest ones they sell, like at Office Depot, are like 3 foot by 5 foot. You want the big ones, okay? Now, the number one reason is visualization. What's the other reason that we want the whiteboard?
Creates authority, right?
Engagement. Engagement. See, when I cover material, I'm going to use multiple techniques to engage you. How important is it? To engage you and to get you to commit. What are some of the things I'm going to do? I'm going to get you to engage. I'm going to get you to commit. And I'm also going to evaluate you to see if there's an obstacle, if there's a problem. That's the other reason I'm going to use this whiteboard. I'm going to be able to see. I'm going to engage you. By engaging you, I'm going to see if you're with me or not with me, or if there's an obstacle or not, and I'm going to get you to commit. That's the other reason I'm using this whiteboard, which is very different than putting in a tape and say, hey, patient, watch the tape. No engagement, no commitment. There's nothing. I mean, they could just turn and think about their kid's soccer game or whatever. So, and then we just put up here the basics to make it easy for you. That's all, okay? So if you already have it up here, so you can see here we have inflammation, repair phase, remodel phase. I just put scar there. You can say collagen, scar tissue here. Okay. And obviously you want it legible, unlike mine. And then you're going to put the 4 negative parts, increased number of nerves, decreased threshold, 70% is strong, 70% is elastic. I draw a line. Why am I drawing the line here? To create visual distinctions so it doesn't just look like everything's together. Okay? So that's part of the visual process of the education. Okay, so here's what I wanted to get into. There's some major points when you're going over the 3 phases of healing with patient education, okay? Now, one of the most important things, actually the most important thing when you're explaining the 3 phases of healing, and again, on day 1 we go over the inflammation phase, day 2 we go over the repair phase, day 3 we go over the remodel phase. But I want to cover right now some very important forms of communication it's major. You have to know, you got to be good at it, okay? And when you're covering this, remember what are the 3 things that you always have to be saying every time you cover with the patient the 3 phases of healing. You have to personalize it. And what are the 3 components to personalize this? You have to say what we want: their first name, their chief complaint, because that's the one that they're spending time and money on, and that's the one they want you to spend the most time, energy on. Remember, a lot of times patients will not come in for secondary or tertiary complaints. That will not be enough of a problem for them to overcome time or money. Be aware of that. So you always need to make sure you understand what the primary complaint is, because that is the reason that overcame time or money to get them to come in. I'll say, so their first name, to personalize it, their chief complaint, because it's the highest priority, and number 3, their primary restricted ADL. That is absolutely the pinnacle reason of why they're coming into you. Now, why do I need to do that? Why do I need to say their name, their chief complaint? Why can't I just teach them about the 3 phases of healing? Why? Here's why. Remember the formula. The formula for the purchase is what? It's 3 components. It's the perceived need relative to the obstacles of time or money and trust. Those are the 3 levers. Think of them as levers. You're going to be controlling these levers. And the bottom line is when their perceived need is greater and then their perceived obstacles of time or money and there's trust, that's when they purchase. Okay? Now, having said that, of those components, which one is most important? That you're cheaper, that you cost less, that there's no wait policy, that they trust you, or need? Need. None of the other factors matter if there's no need. Doesn't matter if there's all kinds of trust. If there's no need, are they spending time or money? If there's no need, do they care that there's no wait policy and they can get in and out of your office real easy? Do you understand this? How important is the knowledge to be able to establish need? You have to be able to establish need. And what's the byproduct, by the way, as you establish need, what naturally happens to the perception of money? The cost goes up or down. It naturally goes down without even addressing the money issue. Okay? So establishing need is, and so the reason this is so important, that you have to say those three things. Name. When you're talking about this, in other words, you can't just educate them on the three phases of healing. You cannot just do that. I need to emphasize this. You need to say these three components. You need to say their name. You need to say their primary complaint as you're talking about this and their primary ADL. And here's why. We already said need is the most important component, and there's three components that establish need. Admit phase, they got to admit to the problem. Number two, consequences. Of the consequences, there's pain and pleasure-based consequences. We're going to use pleasure and pain, but the most important motivating is the pain-based consequences, which are the restrictions and limitations of things that are most important to that person, which are called what? Primary pain-based motivators. Shelter, food, okay? That's the primary pain-based motivator. And then the third category, admit, consequences, and personalization, the personalization. So, if I use their name, is it personal? Yes. Consequences, I'm going to go into the consequences. I'm going to go into pleasure-based consequences. In other words, try to get their primary pain-based motivation of their chief complaint back to normal. That's the absolute most important thing that they care about, their chief complaint. It's the most important activity that they care about, the primary ADL. And we're going to talk about how we're going to get that normal or as much as normal as possible. That's the pleasure component. Then we're going to go also include the pain component. What's the pain component that we're going to be addressing? Again, we're still at the highest priority of chief complaint. We're at the highest ADL. And now we're talking about if it's going to be a permanent problem the rest of their life. In other words, are they going to suffer that chief complaint with that ADL? Are you going to suffer with that the rest of your life to some degree? That is the pain-based consequences. Okay? And then you got admit, consequences, and the personalization. What are all the components of the personalization we used? We used their name. We personalized it with their chief complaint. We personalized it with their primary ADL. Do you understand this? That's what you have to do. That's how you establish need. And how important is need relative to the components of getting people to purchase? Need relative to the obstacles of time or money or trust. That's the relationship of all this. Do you understand this? Be aware of what I just said. That's the relationship of how it all works. Your skill set, your ability and your skill set is going to determine it. The less skill set you have, the more market forces you're going to get. What does that mean, market forces? They're going to just come in for symptom care and go. The less skill set you have, the more market forces you get. The more skill set you have, now they stop putting the emphasis on their symptoms and they place it on third-party biomarkers relative to the three phases of healing. Now they understand that, but that alone won't do it. We still have to handle money, so we're going to lower the perception of money and spread it out to make it. So we're going to increase the perceived need. We're going to lower money and even lower it more by spreading it out. That's called going to terms. So the perception of money relative to cost, we're going to make sure that ratio is good. The perceived need is higher than the money. Same with time. And there's three components of time. One, how long they have to wait. Two, how long is the treatment when they come in. Three, how long when can they get in as far as how early you open or how late you close. Those are the three obstacles of time. So if we can establish need, come over to the money, and lower it by spreading it out, and then go into the time and make sure they understand that there's not going to be much of a wait, that they can get in and out either before or after work, and they don't have to miss any work. And when they do come in, they're not here for 2 hours. That's the formula for patient retention. And it's third-party biomarkers based on how they feel. Now, your skill will determine that, how well you know how to do that. Okay? So that's what this is.